Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 31st episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. And this video, it'll be a bit unique, I guess, in the fact that I'm just going to go about talking about my own spiritual awakening about 2 years ago, some personal struggles, testimonies, books I've read, and basically, the things that I'm struggling with in spirituality. Because in my other videos, it's very much almost me giving lectures about things, talking from a vantage point where it seems like I know it all, when in fact I'm. If you came to know me, then you'd know that I'm a human, regular human, just like anybody else, trying to figure out what the hell we're doing here. Um, and so, hence the word brainstorm that I was using in as a keyword, because brainstorm doesn't imply truth. It's a brainstorm, so it's a thought process trying to figure out things, and it also implies that it's one in a series. It also implies that it's not an ultimate truth, but it always is susceptible to evolve, which is also something that I've chosen. I've chosen specifically to always sort of have this doubt, this healthy doubt, to question my own conception and concepts and truths, which allows for a more interesting sort of evolution. And I've seen in the 2 years since I had my spiritual awakening, I've changed the ideas I had many, many times around. So let's start with, and there are going to be a few. So, I mean, feel free to skip if you're not interested in all of them. So, my spiritual awakening. So, the way it happened is basically in 2017. I was, as I guess most people, I was kind of scared about the fate of the world and afraid of a sort of an end of the world scenario. And I was stashing water in my basement and pasta and rice. And I was sensing that the financial system is going to collapse, or a nuclear war was going to be launched between North Korea and the US. It just drove me to a point of really, on the one hand, deep panic about our reality. And I was also seeing this from a materialist lens. Materialist, oh boy. Okay, materialist lens. An atheist as well. I was atheist and materialist. So, parallel to that, I also had deep questions about, existential questions about what the hell we're doing here and what's this circus show all about. And so these two coupled together, plus I started to binge watch videos on YouTube, very materialist in nature, but still reflecting on psychology, on the human psyche, and all kinds of things. And the one video that sort of set it off was a debate between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris. And they did a podcast on what is truth. What is the truth? And this concept of truth had been bugging me for a long time, trying to find an ultimate truth. And that's sort of, after I've listened to that podcast, I didn't sleep for 2 weeks. I had insomnia. And I started writing random paragraphs of weird ideas that just came to my head, seemingly out of nowhere, and ideas that I had no clue where they were coming from, because they were not related to anything I've ever read, ever. I became a believer in God. So I went from atheism to believing in God within a few days. Um, but the the less I slept, the more delirious I became, and at the end, I was persuaded that I was a kind of a prophet alone in a world where people were all asleep, and I needed to wake them up. I had this mission that I had to fulfill to save the world, and ultimately I just went straight to the. My wife drove me to the psychiatric emergency unit in the hospital because I was just talking complete crazy talk, basically that a nuclear attack was imminent, that we're going to all sort of shift into another dimension, that I would die in one dimension and be born in another. I mean, it was really, really, now that I think about it, it's funny, of course, but at the time it was really not funny. So then I slept for about 18 hours straight in the hospital. They gave me a few sleeping pills. And when I woke up, then synchronicities started. I went to see a psychologist who gave me books to read, a book to read when I sort of came clean about all my what I've experienced. And she was fortunate enough that she was open to spirituality and gave me these books that once I've read them, it explained everything, every single thought that I had in the 2 weeks insomnia period. And one thing led to another. Then I went to see some clairvoyants. I read so many other books. I read the Conversations with God series, the Convoluted Universe, Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle. I think that's how you say it. There's an H somewhere. Okay. What else? Autobiography of a Yogi. I read, well, a ton of books, and at some point I just felt the need to make sense of the things that I've wrote and to find my own truth. And that's when I started writing. And I really needed to get some of these ideas and questions that I had out of my system. Like, for instance, what do you mean, like, time does not exist? Okay, how does that even work? If everything is happening all at once and all of these things, I just had these questions that I wasn't finding an answer to. And the more I asked, the more insight I just got, the same way you get inspiration for writing a book. I mean, it didn't come any other way. So that's the backstory of all of this. And then my personal struggles. I mean, I had somebody write me an email yesterday. It's always nice to have feedback from my viewers. And in the latest video, I do address a tiny little bit non-duality, saying that many non-dualists are too much in the absolute, not enough in the relative. But the truth is non-duality is something that I really struggle with. I don't know if you've this one person that I've seen, Jim Newman. I've watched a few of his interviews and his lectures, especially an interview with another guy, New Realities TV, I think. Seinfeld, something like that. I can't remember his name. But anyways, it was just painful to watch. I was really, that really tortured my mind because I am very much in the intellect. I like to explain things. I have questions about our reality. And so mental, intellect, it's all about understanding, not so much about feeling. I'm actually very bad at intuition and feeling, pure feeling. Rather good in modeling things and answering questions in a sort of an academic style. So it's a kind of a blend between materialism, which tries to explain things, and spirituality. But I guess also that's what some viewers find refreshing, I guess, in my videos. But it has its own limitations, definitely. And so non-duality is, at least the way that I perceive it, and the way these interviews were conducted, every single answer to any single question is, either you don't exist, no existence, or there's only appearance, there's only this, there is only this that seems to appear but doesn't really appear. I mean, it's just like you would ask any question to this guy specifically, like, what do you think of the Israelo-Palestinian conflict? And he would say, what conflict? There's only the appearance of a conflict, and the protagonists only appear to exist. And I mean, it's really, that's for me, that's a mindfuck. That's the real mindfuck. For me, it's actually easier to talk about infinity, the absolute, or whatever, than to wrap my head around this, the full implications of bringing this unity concept, bringing unity concept into the relative as is, like really as if the relative doesn't exist anymore. I don't know. It's just this marriage in non-duality. I just don't know how you do it. I don't know how these people do it, and hence my criticism in the last video. It's just something that I cannot imagine. Like, for instance, this guy Jim Newman, for instance, if he only appears to exist and there's only this and it has no meaning and all this, then how does he even decide what to experience next, or make any decision, or make any choices? And if he makes any choices, why does he make those choices, not other ones? Because obviously, if you make choices, they're based on some belief. If you have no beliefs, then all choices are equal. And then, I don't know, do you flip a coin or something? It's just something that really I'm very much struggling with. So if any of you have any thoughts about non-duality, in trying to give me some tools to understand how how to marry non-duality with a relative experience and a relative world, which is very much dual, I'd be happy to hear your thoughts. That's really a big struggle that I have. What I'm trying to do in my videos, and I think it's clear by now, is to embrace duality, to reconcile it and explain it. And that's how I reach this kind of non-duality. Not that it's negating the fact that duality exists, which sometimes is what I feel when I hear non-duality. It's almost like a negation of duality, like it's an illusion. But rather saying, embracing the illusion, but bringing it together inside the illusion. And so that's also one of the things that I'm trying to do in my videos, is always integration. It's always this and that, never this or that. And so I think Bashar also has the same kind of methodology. But to say that the relative exists, the absolute exists, both are true, none are to be rejected. So even the ego, which is an illusion, since we experience it, it has to exist. It has to be part of the absolute. So the absolute, for me, includes the relative inside of it. It's inside the absolute. Relative is inside the absolute. And if you want to go into the absolute and just saying that the relative is an illusion, to me, you're not in the absolute, because you're rejecting part of something that exists. The experience that you're having right now as an ego exists. And so I just cannot imagine how you can reject it. So that's my struggle with non-duality. Moving on, and there are many. So it's going to be like a full disclosure video, kind of. Spirituality and experience. I think here it's what I was trying to say is that there is one thing is the things that you know, the things that you read, and one thing is what you experience daily in your everyday life. and those two are not necessarily always compatible. So how would I compare it? I think it's the same with any kind of paradigm shift. Um, Sometimes the knowledge arrives before the experience of the knowledge. So, for instance, in materialism, it took time for theoretical knowledge to be transferred into experience. Like the first manned flight with the Wright brothers, um, it's best that they first of all they did it alone, and they were actually believing in this. They're trying to how should I say, like almost confirm their beliefs through experience. And the more people do that, the more it reinforces the knowledge, which reinforces the experience, and that kind of goes into a virtuous circle. But thank God it's not people that had no belief in the possibility or the ability of man to fly or with a machine that did the first test, because they would have failed miserably. It would be self-defeating. So there's always a kind of discrepancy between spirituality, which is a new paradigm shift for humanity, and the experience we're having. And that's also a struggle that I'm having daily, is that I don't necessarily see every day the results or the implications or the truth that I've acquired in spirituality. Now, if you hear any baby screams, it's normal because I'm with my 2 weeks old son. So just don't freak out if you hear any kind of baby screams. I'll pause the video if it becomes too prevalent. But right now he's sitting on me and looking around, so all good. So moving on, I think that's what I want to say. I wrote all of these in advance, but then, so absolute truth versus relative truth. Now, this is a really tough one because, well, like I said, I mean, what I'm trying to do is, let's say that humans are here. There's a kind of a timeline here because we are in a linear time, and there are ideas and truths which are somewhere, you could place them somewhere in a very distant future, or ideas and truths that are kind of rooted in the past, like old dogmas and religions and so forth. And what I'm trying to do is to really focus on this sweet spot right here, because these truths are useless, or useless in the sense that they're interesting philosophically speaking, and it's always nice to discuss them, but they're not necessarily useful to our experience because sometimes I compare it to like a 6-year-old, and you give them an explanation of how the digestive system works, and you know that it's not going to be the full truth, but it is an incremental step forward from their understanding with no prior knowledge of how it works. And you're not going to give them a PhD level dissertation on how the digestive system works. You're going to give them something that is going to help them advance and raise their understandings just so slightly. And so that's what I'm trying to do here, is to ask for the next relative truth that is most interesting for forwarding the human consciousness, taking the human consciousness forward. So another example would be like trying to teach a chimpanzee using an iPhone when it might be more interesting for them to master fire. And so it's really what I'm trying to do in the relative is to try to explore the truths that are useful in our the evolution of our consciousness, rather than absolute truths or truths that are just not relevant for our experience at this time. That's the intention I have when I'm questioning, when I'm asking for things. Um, and what it means is that in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, whatever videos I've produced may be obsolete. Maybe the ideas will not be relevant anymore, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. But it's still a struggle that I have, especially since the ultimate truth, the absolute truth, I don't even think that it's possible to call it that. There's a semantic problem here, is that truth is, if truth exists as a concept, it exists because there is lie also, something that isn't true, or falsehood. And in the absolute, this idea falls apart. There is no truth. Like, everything is the truth, and then therefore nothing is true. And in the absolute also, from my understanding, is that the absolute is beyond concept anyways, beyond words, beyond anything you can coin or anything you can use as a term. I use infinity because it's a very inclusive term, but even infinity is still limited. And even the word truth, it's I don't like the word. Even when I say relative truths, the fact that I'm calling it truth is, well, it's not an accurate term. In my other videos, I was talking about the fact that we generate an interface, and in interfaces, you don't say that Linux is more true than Windows. You just say that it's an experience you'd rather have, or an interface you'd rather use. And so, even with the concept and the word truth, I have issues. I have struggles. Next, life struggles. Yay! So this is something that I think everybody that's going on the spiritual path faces at one point or another, and it's linked to this dichotomy between spirituality and experience. I mean, I experience, for instance, guilt of, for instance, if I'm not productive enough at work versus, enjoying my private life. For instance, I love spending time with my family, and I'm not working enough. But in our society, when you're not productive, you're deemed as useless, and like a sort of a parasite that is a leech on society. And so there's always this guilt that is there for doing or not doing something, or being or not being someone. And it's very hard to get out of this circle of guilt. And sometimes you just feel guilt of being guilty of something. I mean, you feel guilt that you're guilty of, that you feel guilt. I don't know how you say it. It's like this fear of fear, or guilt of guilt. Then when you get into spirituality, you feel guilty that you feel guilty, and it drives you nuts. These kind of circular emotions or feelings, that when you try to get rid of your guilt, it's almost as if you're by rejecting it, it's another form of guilt. And it's just, yeah. So that's something that's really hard, and it's the same for everything. It's the fear of fear. It's the having no desires. That's a desire in itself, to have no desires. And you have all of these texts, the very profound texts in Hindu spirituality especially, and in Buddhism, in sort of raising above, or being free or whatever. It 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 requires moving through all of these struggles, and I'm no exception to the rule. I mean, I feel them just as much as anyone feels them. With choice, I also have a lot of issues, because once you get into spirituality and you acquire that sort of freedom to choose, it's actually sometimes quite restrictive and limiting to be free, because then suddenly you have to take the responsibility of your choices, and you have to design your own criteria for deciding which choice you should make. I mean, as long as you are subscribing to the norms of society, it's so easy to make choices, because they are sort of predefined and predetermined. Like, what work should you do? Okay, our society, what does it say? It says whoever makes the most amount of money or has the most amount of power is the best. So therefore, when you have a choice between two jobs, you're going to choose according to that kind of value and that kind of rank and that kind of model or structure for making choices. But once you deconstruct that and it's all out of the window, and now you understand that you have to make choices from within and start being responsible for your choices and take responsibility instead of just adopting whatever society is expecting of you. You have so much more freedom in the choices you make, but then you have to um, you have to trust your gut instinct. And so, since I am very much intellectual, not very much intuitive, I have a very hard time making choices. For instance, I'm also an amateur musician. I compose music. You can check my other website. I'll put it in the marmamusic.com, and I'll put the link to my YouTube channel in the description. So I also like to do that, but then what should I prioritize? I'd also like to um, keep working on my spirituality and explore more and know more, but I'm reaching sort of limits in how far I can get with that, because when I read books now, I don't learn anything new. And yeah, it's linked to this what to do rather than what to be. And even I have difficulties with that. Even if I understand that it's not so much about what you do, but who you are when you're doing it. Um, yeah, I mean, just like everyone, I'm still very much pondering the question: Who am I? What am I supposed to do? And every experience that I have is this kind of a test, a trial and error. Like making these videos, it's a trial. It's trying to um, get out there, contribute in some way or another to share my knowledge and see if it's useful to people, if it's useful to me as a person as well. Then I also have my own physical pains. I mean, I have right shoulder pain that's been there for like 10 years, impossible to get rid of. Um, and I don't know why. And of course, I know all of the spiritual stuff, all about symbolics, all about energetics, all about karma, all about, the fact that the body, sometimes has to take on certain diseases uh, when you cannot process something, um, some blockage or whatever, you manifest it physically. And I still haven't. I still have it, and I've been to plenty of people to try and help. Doesn't help. So I'm still very much human, very much here. I'm also dealing with childhood traumas that I still carry over. So if in my videos it makes it look like I'm some kind of guru that's peacefully living on a mountain or something, then absolutely not. I'm just as much a human struggling in this third dimension as anybody else. Um, Sorry to disappoint. Fears of the absolute. That's one of the big fears I had when I had my spiritual awakening. Um, I also called my wife from Paris and on a business trip right before I went completely bonkers, and I said, "My God, I know too many things now. I'm going to fall through my own black hole into and the whole reality is going to collapse around me or something." And I mean, I was just going completely crazy. But it is a kind of a fear that I've been having around. I mean, just transposing in different ways of falling into the absolute and leaving the relative if I go too far. Um, and it's going to be linked to the other things that I'm struggling with before. But I do have this fear of disintegrating, my ego disappearing, all of these things. Um, and I do have a certain fear of the absolute, of losing my sense of identity and all these things. Even though so many texts are saying, no, 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 don't worry, you keep everything and all that stuff. I just, I know what I'm leaving. I don't know what I'm getting myself into once I leave my body, and all that stuff still remains kind of a mystery. And so I'm still clinging on to this experience, definitely. And I have this fear of the absolute. Nothing to save but oneself. Yes. So this is a very interesting insight that I had, is that it's almost as if the only person you can save is yourself. And if you save yourself, then there are, if there are like 7 billion people on Earth, actually, there are 7 billion times 7 billion people on Earth. Because each and every single person, um, so each and every single person has, it's almost like in your own mind, there lives a copy of the other 6.99999 billion people. So it's almost as if whoever exists in your reality are parallel versions or clones of 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 the real persons. Like you never really see anyone real in your reality. They're just versions of themselves as perceived by you. So there's 7 billion versions of you existing in the mind of each and every single person, and you have a copy of everybody else in your own perception. And so if you save yourself, you simultaneously save all the other people that are in your reality, because you save those versions of themselves. And so it takes 7 billion people to save themselves to save 7 times 7 billion people. And so if you save yourself, you've actually saved a version of your friends, of your families, of your whatever. And there's still 6.999 billion versions of you that are not saved, or of them that are not saved, and um, that require the fact that they should save themselves as well. And it's something that I'm still struggling with, because the mere fact that I'm focusing my efforts in producing these videos and producing articles and still influencing the outside, because if I'm talking to you, it means that I'm still influencing the outside, that I'm not necessarily focusing my attention inside and dealing with my own crap. And so I don't know if there's a balance to be struck there, or if I should focus on the inside. I mean, it's something that I'm struggling with. So I understand this concept, that the fact that there's nobody else to save but yourself, and nobody else that you can save but yourself, because ultimately, even if you do save somebody on the outside, it's just one version of them that are existing in like 7 billion parallel realities, or copies of the reality, where you can only save the versions of the people that exist within your mind, so to speak. And well, another thing that needs to be clarified is this concept of saving, which is incompatible with absolute again. Because if you consider that there is someone to save, someone needs to be saved, then you're contributing to manifest that very thing. Like it's by saving yourself means that you acknowledge that there's nothing to save, and thereby you're saved. So long as you want to save yourself, then you require yourself to be in a state which needs to be saved in order to save yourself. You understand? So there's this really big paradox as soon as you touch things in the absolute, where, and you read that when you read Eckhart Tolle, it's like everything is now. You can resolve everything now. And by stopping to qualify things as in need of being saved, or giving them any kind of attribute, because that is already restricting and limiting them, or reinforcing this kind of dual vision and nature of things. It's the same with people that are trying to save the world. They will never save the world, because by trying to save the world, they're acknowledging that this world needs saving, and therefore the world needs to have some kind of problem or some kind of issues for them to save it. And so it's just going to be running around in circles um, forever. And that's what you're trying to, what we're kind of trying to break out of manifesting the very problems we're trying to fight against because we qualify them as problems. And even that, it's just so, it's powerful, but it's still so abstract. How do you even do that? And some people would say it's apathy. I'm still struggling with these concepts, but so I wanted to come clean on that one as well. Um, Limits of the intellect. Well, there's a big one. Nothing to save. I've already um, addressed that one. That ultimately, there's nothing to save. But then, why the hell am I talking to you? I'm talking to myself, maybe. Beyond truth or concept, that's also something I've mentioned, is that ultimately the intellect can only go so far. At some point, you just have to shut it down and be just like my little son here that is sitting on my lap, and which I love to death. He's just there. It's just pure presence, pure acceptance of things that are coming to him, sort of a pure observer without any kind of judgment or whatever, without any prior concept of what's happening to him or a frame of analysis. And when you reach out towards the absolute, if you still have, if you're still trying to grasp it via the intellect, then it's dead. It's over because you're projecting a form onto the absolute where there is none, and you're not going to see it as it is, but you're going to see it as you think it is. And so at some point the intellect needs to kind of not die, but I mean, just have to let it go, so to speak. You have to say you're not qualified anymore now. This, but of course, the reason I'm doing these videos and the reason I'm pouring all this knowledge out there is that you need to take it to the point where it recognizes it cannot go any further. And if you don't do that, then your intellect is not going to give up the fight. It's going to say, "Yeah, I'm still capable. I'm still capable." It's sometimes it's just like certain children. If you let them live out their fantasies or their things, and they do the experience and they see that it doesn't work, then they can transcend it and move on. Rather than if you forbid them from doing it, then they still can fantasize. I don't even know if you spell that way, but they can still fantasize and saying, "Oh, had I done this, or it would have been possible if I had done that." So by really squeezing the intellect dry of and pushing it to the very boundary of its knowledge and its ability is also a way to transcend it. And then there are many other things. Meaninglessness, for instance. Meaninglessness, it comes back to the fact that if nothing has meaning, then um, I mean, I cannot go as far as experiencing that without going crazy. I think at this level of my understanding and spiritual, well, where I am in my spiritual path, I need meaning to live. I need meaning to make choices, and the meaning that I have, I think, is sort of transparent. The meaning that I give to things is transparent in my videos, um, but it's still meaning. It's not nearly um, as far as some other spiritual teachers have brought it. The same for truth. I've already discussed those things. Um, Choices, freedom, and limitation. Meaningless choices, infinite freedom, can and must. Well, I've already discussed infinite freedom and the fact that infinite freedom is infinite imprisonment as well. Once, if you don't put limitations on your own accord, then you're lost in infinity. And that's something that I'm struggling with very much, is that when you walk the spiritual path, at some point there is this possibility where you can just break free of everything. You can throw everything down the toilet. Every single concept, idea, or limitation, you can say, none of that exists. The absolute, the infinite, boom. And it's really, to me, it's like jumping off a cliff. To me, it really scares me to death. I can't get past that. And the can versus must, that's something very important. Is that I always try to speak from the position of can. You can do something, never you must do something. So it's always something you can do in addition to what you already know, what you already are doing, but not something that you must do. And so if you ever hear me say you must do this or you must do that, then please ignore whatever I'm saying, because I'm not speaking from a sort of a higher vantage point. Can is increasing your possibilities, what you what you can do. And it brings me back to the 6 year old who you explain how the digestive system works. As an adult, you can still do that. But in addition, you can also explain it in more complex ways. It's always adding and adding and adding, never subtracting. Conscious creators. Now, I've mentioned this in previous videos, but I think that basically the experience, the value of the experience that we're having here on Earth for our soul, from my understanding, is that it helps us become balanced, conscious creators. And all these struggles of overcoming the guilt of guilt, overcoming the fear of fear, overcoming the desire of non-desire or whatever. It's all about creating balanced creations. So, so basically, this idea of non-attachment, this idea of just creating for the sake of creating and without attaching any kind of meaning or ascribing any meaning to anything. That's how you explain that this experience even exists, because it's not tainted by an imbalanced creator, because all experiences are possible, and there's this amount of freedom is available to us precisely because it wasn't created with this intention of being only good or being only evil or being only something or and not another. So and this it's still very difficult for me. I think theoretically I understand it, but at least that's what I believe. But it's still very hard to bring it to into practice. So next one, I think we're almost done. Yeah, I mean, here are some things that I find absolutely puzzling, and that is there's no way that I can actually grasp with my intellect. And those are to me the real mysteries of this world. Is the existence of humor, for instance. How do you explain that something is funny? I mean, that to me is amazing. And sometimes I have these flashes where I imagine these higher dimensional beings that are discussing the fate of humanity, as a sort of fantasy. Of course, I know it's not true, but I just imagine it. And they're there and they're saying, well, I mean, come on, look at them, and they're destroying their planet, and they have nuclear weapons and they're violent and everything. And then somebody around the table says, yeah, you're right, but look at the jokes and the memes around the latest coronavirus. Aren't they hilarious? And then the people around the table say, yeah, you're right. I mean, we'd lose so much if humanity disappeared. I mean, we would have so much, so many laughs. We wouldn't have as much laughs uh, if humanity was destroyed. And to be honest, when I go around Facebook or whatever, and I see the creativity in for humor, self derision, um, even linked with something tragic like the coronavirus, I mean, it brings me really. I'm almost proud of being human, because it's amazing. It's amazing. It's something that there's just no way of explaining via materialism or via logic, that humor exists like that, and that it has that kind of uplifting carelessness and joy that it brings. It's amazing. The existence of beauty. How do you how do you even capture with words the feelings that you have when you see a beautiful scenery or when you hear beautiful music? It's beyond words, it's beyond thought, it's beyond anything. It's just pure experience. And that's where again the intellect is powerless. And that's where experience and intuition are king. Intuition, feelings, emotions, basically all of the stuff that I don't discuss in this channel, because while I certainly have them, of course I have feelings and emotions and all that stuff, I don't feel as, how should I say, comfortable talking about them, because that's not how most guys are raised, I guess. Don't trust your feelings. Don't show your feelings. Yeah, another thing to add to my list of struggles. But the intellect, yeah, that's good. That's going to make you win. That's going to make you superior. That's going to make you popular, powerful, everything. So, I'm feeling these as much as anyone, and and they're probably more puzzling and more amazing and more magical to me, specifically because I've kind of, how should I say, I've kind of downplayed or ignored these facets of my being, and so they're much more magical than intellect, which I can ramble about infinity and theory and what we're doing here and the universe, how things work, for hours on end. But I'm just muted when it comes to, and I love classical music, for instance, but when it comes to speaking about a classical music piece, it brings me to tears sometimes, and I have these rushes of emotion and everything. But it's just, there's no words, there's nothing you can do. You can just experience, and then that's it. And that's a part that's really missing in those videos. So that's again one struggle I want to come clean about. And even happiness. I like what Eckhart Tolle says when he says that happiness happens to you. It just happens. It's not something that you can really chase after. It's it's like right now I'm looking at my son who's sucking on my pinky because he's hungry, waiting for my wife to get back with the providential milk, and I'm thinking, wow, you know, you have these moments where you feel just so much happiness, so much gratefulness for being here, so much gratitude, and then it just goes, and then it comes back like waves on a beach, and yeah, I mean it's quite something, and it's not something that I can capture in any video. It really is beyond words, beyond intellect. Never enough. Never enough is something that I been experiencing for 2 years. Well, my whole life, but especially these 2 years since my spiritual awakening, is that no matter how far I go in my reflections on explaining what we're doing here, um, why all this masquerade and where we're heading and all these stuff, I'm never out of questions, and I'm always hungry for more. Even when I receive more, I still want more, and that's why I'm saying I was kind of, how should I say, stuck? Not stuck. Stuck is the bad word, but bored when I read books, because I just want always. I'm always seeking for more. Like, if even if it sounds like the truth, even if what is being described to me about going into the absolute and all that rings true, I'm still not satisfied. And maybe that's linked to the fact that so far precisely I've I've been focused on intellect and understanding, and not the experience part and feeling. So I'm probably too advanced here and not advanced enough in the feeling part. as opposed to other channelers like what was that channel? I can't remember now. Leo from actualize.org. That's it. I mean, he does DMT every other week, and he has new experiences and new feelings to bring from the interactions and the absolute and the experience of the absolute. And it's amazing how he talks about it for 2 hours sometimes, about how what he felt, what he experienced. I had zero, none of that. And part of that is linked to my fear of the absolute, as I was talking about earlier, the fact that I'm scared of not never coming back. And that brings me to the point of, well, yeah. So here, yeah, the one other thing that I want to say is that I'm clearly, I'm frustrated of this. I mean, for sure, because I have no sort of validation for my ideas other than the feedback that people give me, because I haven't had like these first firsthand experiences like channelers or people that have left their body and went to the astral plane or talked with these high dimensional beings. I have no idea where all of this is coming from, and it is frustrating to not know. It is frustrating to have to wait for the first comment on YouTube to say, "Hey, this is really interesting," or "Oh, I've learned something," because I don't even know what it's worth before anybody tells me that it's worth something. So, but it's also a lesson. It's also a lesson that, um, again, you cannot find your self worth by depending on others so much. And it's another thing that I'm struggling with, another thing that I have to deal with. Um, it's not because I'm advanced in the comprehension or the understanding part that I'm necessarily advanced in other parts, like self, like confidence, basically, just pure, just confidence in what I'm saying, what I'm presenting, because I don't have that validation of knowing that I'm talking to God or whatever, like in Conversations with God or other books. Logic versus form. That's an interesting one. And that's the limits of the intellect as well. Again, is that while I can understand the logic of certain things, and there are many logics that are great, like for instance, I really much subscribe to the whole on philosophy or the big history interpretation of David Christian. Is it David Christian or is it something else? Yeah, I think it's David Christian. The fact that we are on the brink of, and I've said this at length in my videos of becoming a sort of yet another new complex structure that the universe uses to experience itself, or the whole on philosophy. Those are the logics, but then it tells you nothing about the actual form it will take in your actual experience. So in the video about the coronavirus, I was saying that the coronavirus is just one way that we get to give a form to a certain process of moving from the old to the new, and it could have been anything else. And that's what's frustrating also with focusing on logic through the intellect, is that it gives you a heading, but you're still surprised by events when they happen because it does not have any kind of predictive power other than uh, other than knowing, roughly where we're heading in terms of the ultimate goal. So it's like, you're going to go to the top of the mountain, but you have no idea which path you're going to take or what experiences you're going to have along the way. And yeah, I mean, that is something that I'm also struggling with, because many people do give forms to things. Many people, where I have much more difficulty with that, like making predictions of about the bushfires or in Australia, or about the coronavirus, about the burning of certain things, like Nostradamus doing predictions. I'm very bad at that. And finally, ego. Oops. Full disclosure, I still have an ego. No mystery there. So I still get angry at things. Still get frustrated. I'm far from this sort of equanimity and full peace of mind in relations to everything. Um, so yeah, I don't know what I don't know if you've enjoyed this one. I mean, um, I try to be truthful and sincere about where I'm at in my own spiritual journey, because it's true that from listening to my videos, it does sound like I know absolutely what I'm talking about, but often it's just a sort of an insight that I have, an idea that pops into my mind, and I explain it, and it does have a certain coherence. But yeah, the takeaway is, hey, if it helps you, I'm really glad. But if at any point you feel that it's limiting or that doesn't make you feel good, then please just disregard anything that I'm saying, because I'm really playing by ear here. I have no way of saying this comes from higher dimensional beings or whatever. And I think it's important also to acknowledge the own limitations of your brain, how it's wired, your preconceptions about things, and your beliefs, of course, because all of these are filtering the insight that you're getting. And in my case, I guess what saves me is that all of this is shaky, which means I'm always open to questioning my beliefs, questioning my preconceptions, and rewiring my brain. And therefore, I guess I allow that space for evolution and moving towards more complex or different or ideas, or acknowledging that some idea may have been wrong or may have been incomplete or may have been um, one step in this infinitely long journey of finding better and better interfaces to experience reality. So maybe I'll finish with a bonus for those that stayed with me for an hour rambling about my struggles. Here's an insight that I had when I had my spiritual awakening, and I had no prior knowledge of anything yet. It's this ideas of dreams embedded in one another, but in in kind of a different way. What I had as a revelation is that these structures, these these forms in the universe, like the photon, like the atom, and I'm going to make shortcuts here, the molecule, like the living cell, like the human, and then whatever is beyond human. What I had as an insight is that they always had sort of a dual nature, and they were also kind of awake. They had an awake state and a sleep state, and that it's almost as if the photon had a dual nature of being vibrations when it was it awake maybe, and asleep it was a particle. So the equivalent of the astral plane for the photon is that it dreams of being a particle, so to speak, when it's in fact it's really a wave. And then the atom, well, I'm making a shortcut here because normally it's about quarks and electrons and stuff like that that are dreaming. In their awake state they are a particle, and in their asleep state they are an atom. But you get the logic. So the atoms then in their awake state, I guess, they are their core elements like neutrons, protons, and electrons. And in their asleep state, or in their astral plane, they are all of these other particles like hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, whatever. And then the same happens here for atoms. In their awake state here, and in their sleep state, they are molecules. And the same for living cells in their asleep state. Well, basically, we are, just to cut the story short for the logic, the living cell is dreaming of being multicellular organisms. And so we are the dream of the living cells. And then so that is our awake state, actually, perceived as our awake state, is the asleep state of the living cell. So every asleep state is an awake state in the further kind of layer of logic. So in the awake state, we are humans, and in the asleep state, we are higher dimensional beings. Aliens, Babaji, Buddha, Jesus. And now what's interesting is that there is a logic going forward, and then there's a logic going backwards. So it's almost as if also during the awake state, each step here tries to rationalize whatever comes before it. All the dreams, so to speak, that are embedded one in another, every single part of this chain is trying to rationalize and stabilize the dreams before them. So by us trying to reverse engineer the past from our awake state, we're sort of stabilizing the dreams that are embedded one inside the other. And the same is the higher dimensional beings from their awake state. They are trying to rationalize all of the sort of dreams that are embedded one inside the other, we being one of those parts. And so there's two movements there. There's one dream going in this direction, kind of. You see one embedding going in one direction towards more complexity, and one that's going downwards in stabilizing all of these kind of processes. So I don't know if that was interesting for you. It's another interpretation, yet still, of these layers of logic, as I call them, or structures, or this holon philosophy of elements forming something bigger than the sum of their parts, and that mechanism repeating into infinity. It's this relationship between awake and asleep, and the two-way process. So in a way, you could say that anything of a higher dimension exists in our minds, just like we exist in the mind, so to speak, or in the imagination of living cells. And just like living cells live in the imagination of molecules, in the dream of molecules. And all of this is kind of trying to stabilize in all directions, moving forward, moving backwards. So, thank you for sticking with me so long, if you've managed. And hopefully this gives another kind of more, it paints a more humane picture and more accurate picture of who I am. And the fact that I'm struggling just like you, just like all of us. And maybe, I don't know, give you strength to pull through these tough times ahead, which I'm also only starting to grapple with. It's been only 2 or 3 days that I've been in confinement with my wife and 2 children, and of course, there's problems with not getting enough sleep, children getting bored indoors, and all those things. But hey, there's no escaping the experience, even for those that are spiritual. I guess that's the takeaway. And so spirituality should definitely not be a way to try to escape the experience or escape living your life. I think there's a Zen proverb that says that the answer to life is life. So the answer to living your life is just living your life. It's a circular thing. Maybe in a more conscious way, hopefully, which makes things easier, and you're not stuck in, like in the previous video, I was saying, like a symphony where a few chords sort of are on repeat, or a record disc skipping, but you're still going for sort of a wild ride, whether, as long as you're alive, basically you're on a roller coaster. That's for sure. Except maybe if people have testimonies as non-duality or whatever, and how that feels. But for me, it's still very much a roller coaster. Yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts, from any feedback on some of these struggles, and talk to you in the next video.